Tips from Trestle is brought to you by eMenu Choice Point of Sale, Wizox AI, and Benny Keith Foods. Welcome to Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality Podcast. This podcast explores the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and the community experience. I'm your host, Aaron Fish. My goal for this podcast: educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living. How? By bringing the resident and customer experience to the front of mind in our industry. We should bring the passionate spirit of food and hospitality to everything that we do and everyone we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. Joining me on this special episode of Tips from Trestle is Kristie Schutt. Christie is the Director of Food and Nutrition for Health Trust GPO and joined the team in 2023. Christie is a registered dietitian and has over a decade of experience in healthcare food service operations. The majority of her career was spent as the Division Food and Nutrition Director in a large IDN. During that time period, she was a food buy customer and saw the importance of driving value through collective analysis and purchasing. She's based out of Nashville, Tennessee, and attended Vanderbilt University. And today we're going to talk about her 5 keys to creating a great emergency preparedness plan. Kristie, thanks for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you. Good to talk with you.
So we want to talk about emergency preparedness. We're recording this early October. We are in the middle of hurricane season for a large portion of the country. And so being prepared is, for food service operators in senior living, is such an important thing. And you have 5 keys that you share with the customers and the clients that you work with when it comes to emergency preparedness. And I'd love to go through those 5 keys with you today. So the first one that you mentioned is doing a risk assessment. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what that looks like and what you're recommending for that.
Sure. So when you complete a risk assessment, you want to think about what are the natural risks or the weather-related risks, and that's often what we automatically think about in those situations. But there are also human risks as well as technical risks. So planning ahead and understanding which of those could potentially be more likely to occur. When you think about weather-related, and as you just mentioned, if you're on the West Coast, you may be more likely to see a wildfire that you're preparing for. In the northern states, they're often thinking about snow and ice. And then in the South, there typically are more tornadoes or flooding that a facility may want to prepare for. So you've got to talk through what is more likely to occur in your area. And then looking at human risks, unfortunately, you could have an active shooter situation, and a facility may need to shut down access to many areas in order to mitigate those risks. And then lastly, the technical risks, which are becoming much more prevalent nowadays. Cyber attacks are happening more often, as well as just how we are all so deeply connected with technical apps and systems and transferring information. If any of those go down, you have to have a plan to revert to more of a manual system of communicating. So you definitely want to figure out which of these are more likely to occur. And in doing that, you're really ranking those risks. And then you want to prepare by creating a plan to address those potential risks.
I think you make an important point there, that there are things other than just hurricanes and tornadoes people need to think about when doing emergency planning, because I know everybody talks about that because that's kind of front of mind, but there's so much more that goes into that. So the next piece of this, so we've sat down and we've kind of ranked the probability of which of these emergencies may occur to us and around us, and kind of which ones are severe and less severe. What's the next step that an operator should take?
Yes, creating a plan. So thinking through how much food, how much water, other supplies do you need to have in storage, or are you going to be potentially moving items from one location to another, if you have that ability to evacuate maybe a group of facilities to move some residents to a nearby location. But you want to know how many residents you're going to be feeding, how many staff as well, and if there may be another external visitor or two there, you want to keep that into consideration. But along with how much, you also got to think about how long. And oftentimes that is guided by local regulations. So it could be 3 days, it could be 7 days, but really understanding what are you going to need, how much of it. And when you think about water, it's not only for drinking water, but potentially preparing food. There may be other means that the facility would need that water. And then, of course, if you don't have water, you don't have power, you've got to be able to serve the food on paper supplies, flatware, and cups, because if you can't use your dish machine, then you're going to need alternative means to feed your residents. So definitely starting out with those basics, and weaved into that is understanding, where am I going to store all this stuff? Do I have the room to store it? That's tough in food nutrition departments to have enough space. So those are just some key details that you want to think about when creating your plan.
There was another piece that you had shared with me when we were planning, where you had talked about the vendors that you work with. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Certainly. So you want to know where your vendors' distribution centers are located. They may also be impacted. For instance, if there's a weather-related event, if they're nearby to your facility, they may also have the same issues. But then again, if they're nearby, they also may be much more available to get products to you than, say, one that's 3 hours away. So understanding what their plans are when those situations occur and how you two can work together to make sure that you have what you need or can get access to it when you need it.
The other thing that you had mentioned that's really important in all of this is the MOUs that you talked about, those memorandums of understanding. What exactly does that entail, and why is that so important for an operator to have from their vendors?
Yeah, it definitely needs to include what products they are guaranteeing that they will have available to you. They may keep certain things in stock just for your locations, but while this is not a legally binding document, it really just helps to outline what are they committing to provide for you in those situations. And then also, what are you committing to making sure you can do so that you can receive those products?
And one piece that I think is also important to think about when you're developing the plan is, if you're doing healthcare, to have some sort of emergency power available to you through a generator or whatever. But a lot of times what that looks like is hit or miss. So what's important there from an operator's perspective to know when it comes to emergency power?
Technology continues to drive changes in senior care, and that includes food service. eMenu Choice is an award-winning point-of-service application for managing the dining function in senior living communities. This mobile, touchscreen-enabled software enhances the dining experience for residents while streamlining processes for staff. The flexibility and functionality of eMenu Choice makes it an effective solution for any type of senior living environment, from independent and assisted living to skilled nursing facilities. It works for production kitchens or restaurant-style service with options for per meal or a la carte pricing, and accommodates a variety of payments, including bill to account, meal credits, and credit cards. Created by a senior care provider with more than a century of experience serving older adults, eMenu Choice eliminates communication barriers between staff and residents while enabling person-centered choices and greater resident satisfaction. eMenu Choice, transforming dining for senior living.
So they really need to know what pieces of equipment are connected to the emergency power. So more than likely, not all of the pieces of equipment in the kitchen are going to be connected. So then hopefully the facility would have access to a generator that they can obviously put in place as soon as possible. So you may only have a few pieces that you can utilize when it's connected. So making sure that as you develop your menus, that you take that into consideration. And I know a lot of facilities, they will create a blueprint, a map of which pieces of equipment are connected. And then you can also even tag those pieces of equipment so that your staff or other staff know which of those items will be able to be used.
I like that last piece where it's got to be everybody knows which pieces of equipment, not just the people in charge. Once you have a plan in place, the third key item that you'd mentioned when we were planning was to sit down and develop policies and procedures. And so what are some of those key steps that operators need to take when doing that?
When they are putting together their policies and procedures, they want to get into the nitty-gritty of, as we talked about, how much food and for how many days. They need to outline all of that detail of the amounts, even if they can speak to, for instance, with the water, what are the sizes of the containers that they're going to be storing the product in, because then that plays into how and who can transport those items. Where are they located? Are they in an area that it is accessed by key code, or you have to have a key to get into that room? But really detailing, plotting out what you need, where it is, even thinking about what's the process of starting with the fresh foods first on how you rotate those products. And then talking through for your staff, what is the chain of command? If the director or the other leaders aren't there, who is the next in line to help lead in that situation? And who do they report up to in those emergencies? And then having copies of all those tools that you'll need when that situation occurs.
One of the key things you had mentioned was talking about communication during downtimes, right? Like, I think we get into the moment of service and like, okay, all hands on deck, let's make things happen. But you start talking about the in-between times and how important that is. And so what are some things that should be considered during the component of the procedures they develop?
So in the situation where your technical applications or systems are down, it's super important to have downtime procedures in place. And typically what that means is you move to old school manual type steps to, for instance, if you're trying to receive special diet orders or allergies on your residents, and that comes through a digital platform, you're going to have to figure out a way through paper or through phone to interact with the nursing team to make sure that you're still following all of those safeguards in feeding your residents. So definitely, just like the typical policy and procedure we've been talking about, outlining what steps need to be taken to manually or verbally pass on this information. I think in food service, it is typically dealing with taking a resident's order, but also then you think about submitting your food orders. Nowadays, pretty much everyone is ordering those through a digital platform, particularly for their prime distributor. But now you'll need to resort to making a phone call or figuring out another way to communicate with your vendors so that you can receive your orders.
I think sometimes you get lost in the shuffle when you're thinking about execution during a crisis. So your fourth key area is staffing and communication kind of broadly. What are some things that operators need to consider when they look at their staffing and communication plans?
Definitely. So they want to think about, first and foremost, what are they going to do when they don't have all of their staff there, but how are they going to communicate with their staff? They need to have at least 2 ways to connect with them, whether that's obviously phone, text, email, making sure that they've always got an updated contact list, because unfortunately there can be high turnover in food nutrition. And so making sure that they've got all of the up-to-date information along with their vendors' contact too. But I think it's very important to go ahead and have some conversations with your team, your supervisors, because some of them may be more interested and willing to stay if they need to during weather-related events. Others may have family that rely on them at certain times of the day and they're not able to do that, or they may live further away. But talking through that with them ahead of time and, cross-training staff, so knowing in those situations that they can do various tasks if they are the ones that end up staying. And as you talk through that with them, sometimes then leads to thinking about, okay, if we're sheltering in place, where will the staff stay? Sometimes facilities have connections to nearby hotels. Others, you're staying in the offices in the facility, and it might be nice to let them know ahead of time of things they may want to keep there. I know a lot of leaders end up having maybe a sleeping bag and some toiletries in their office so that they're ready to go if they can't get out due to a weather-related event.
Really key. One of the other things you mentioned, training and testing protocols. What does that look like? What are some of the key elements of that you see operators having success with?
So most food nutrition departments have a cadence of daily meetings, weekly meetings, quarterly meetings, and they'll typically have the in-service. And so I think it's really important that they include this topic as a part of those in-services, whether it's quarterly or do it in the month that we're in now, focusing as you prepare for certain weather-related events that are more likely, making sure that they're always thinking about that and it's not something that catches them off guard when you get to that situation. So that can be where you're just testing them with some questions or role-playing out some of the scenarios. So again, everybody feels comfortable, even maybe sharing some of the information with the other departments so that they know what will happen and they're prepared as to how the operation may change in those situations. Because I think everybody's stressed out and have their nerves going because of what may be occurring, but I think it helps to mitigate some of that panic and stress when they've already practiced what the plan will be.
For over a century, Benny Keith has been a trusted leader in the food service industry. As a broadline distributor, we offer an extensive selection of products, delivering to 21 states through 10 distribution centers. We can help you create a thriving culinary culture by pairing quality products with customized solutions that elevate your residents' dining experience. Our team of registered dietitians provide unmatched customer service by modifying menus, selecting recipes, ensuring regulatory compliance, and more. Quality, value, and service are at the heart of everything we do. Benny Keith Foods puts the care back in healthcare.
The last point is everybody's required to have their emergency binder available for inspection. But you talk a little bit more about an emergency preparedness folder that is somewhere that's accessible, that everybody can go and see. And so when an operator is putting that together, what are some of the things that you recommend they have in there available so that way they are prepared when something happens?
Yes, I think it's great to have a folder that's a bright color. We mentioned red so that everybody knows this is the emergency information. Like you mentioned, it being in a location where anybody can get to it. They don't have to go through, getting access to that room to find it. So all of the staff know, as we've said a few times, but having all of these details that we've talked about in it. You have a copy of the policy and procedures. You have a copy of your emergency menus, your contact information. If you need a certificate of insurance to bring in a temporary refrigerated truck, you have all of those tools ready to go that we've discussed, that you want to keep documented, the downtime procedures, make sure it's all in that binder, even maps of where you've stored things, the emergency connections for the equipment, that type of stuff.
So how often should an operator look over this folder?
I would say at least quarterly to update any outdated contact information. But I think we talked about doing the in-service trainings and using that folder as a guide for the training. So certainly a quarterly review would be very helpful to make sure nothing needs to be updated.
Obviously, an operator, they put these 5 key items together. They're going to be able to have a pretty solid emergency preparedness plan. And as we wrap up here, though, they may need help with doing this. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about Health Trust and Advantage Trust and how you guys help support operators in making these plans a success.
Yes. So we love to interact with our members and talk through their ideas as they plan for these situations. Always happy to help them brainstorm how they're going to develop their plan, what they need to think about. But then we also have vendors that are available to them that can help them if they need shelf-stable food or shelf-stable water. We've also got vendors that provide emergency equipment, whether that be an emergency kitchen setup, refrigerated trucks, or even for other departments, they have available laundry emergency equipment as well as bathrooms. And those are, again, things that you want to make sure you think about ahead of time and connect yourself to those vendors before you get to those situations, because sometimes there are many others in that same region that are all trying to pull from the same vendors to get that equipment. But then just making sure you've got everything connected, all the documents that you need to have in place beforehand so they can get you those items immediately.
There are definitely vendors on your list there that I would have never, and I think a lot of operators would have never thought of when you think about restrooms and showers, because that's things we need that we just take for granted, I think. And so, Christie, if someone wanted to connect with Advantage Trust and learn how you guys can help support their emergency preparedness or the rest of their operation, how can they do that?
Sure. So they can always reach out to us via email at foodinfo@healthtrustpg.com. They can also go to our website at advantagetrustpg.com to gather more information and connect with us. So we would love to help them.
Perfect. Well, Christie, thanks so much for sharing your 5 keys to a great emergency plan. And thanks for being a guest here on Tips from Trestle.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed talking with you.
So there it is, everybody. Another one in the books. Thanks again for tuning in. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestlehospitalityconcepts.com. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.